We've also got some other guests today with me that I'll introduce in a moment, but gonna give it a couple of minutes to let folks join. If you're not familiar with Button Up Vermont, welcome. I'm again one of the community engagement managers, but my job during the fall is in large part to make this campaign happen. So thank you for joining this Weatherization Wednesday. My hope today is that you'll get lots of good information about health and safety in our homes and learn a bit in the process about what you can do and next steps. So as we start to, looks like we're climbing up in attendees, I'm gonna start getting going in a minute. One exciting thing to let everyone know about is that we do have a prize today. So just by joining, you are entered in to randomly be selected to actually get an air purifier. So thank you for joining. Just by being here, you're entered in to win that air purifier, and you'll learn all about the indoor air quality stuff in a minute. So I'm going to get us started with our presentation. And today, as I mentioned, we got that prize giveaway. So if you're here, thank you. An air purifier could be coming your way. And if you end up using that air purifier and you love it, we would love to hear about it. It's an exciting thing. We've had prizes at the last 2 Weatherization Wednesdays, and we'll have one more coming up next week where you could also win a prize. But I think today's is pretty exciting with our air purifier. So today we're going to learn about a bunch of stuff. The first being, what is weatherization? I'm going to do 2 quick slides about weatherization just to give you a primer. And then we're going to jump right into introducing our co-hosts and talking about the nitty-gritty with the health and safety components that you're here to see. So when we talk about buttoning up, I always start with this slide. We like to describe weatherization as the combo of this analogy. So when you've got a big cable knit sweater on, you're nice and warm. If you're a Vermonter like me and you've got a whole bunch of those, you know that it'll keep you warm when you go outside. But that, representing our insulation, only works most effectively when you layer on something like your windbreaker, which in this metaphor is our air sealing. So when you combine that cable knit sweater, you might have some holes where air can go in and out, but then you layer it with a windbreaker and your air sealing, you're actually reducing that airflow and you're making that insulation even more effective. So when we talk about weatherization, the bonus is that when you combine those 2 things, you get that comfort, you get that savings. So if you've seen me give that slide before, you hopefully are able to now repeat it to all your friends and family at any fun upcoming Halloween celebration or holiday party. So I hope you've heard it enough to have it stick in. The other concept I just want to share with this group is something called the stack effect. And I like to describe this because many Vermonters might feel drafts or air and attribute that to something other than the stack effect. But essentially with this image you're seeing, cold air will come up through your basement if it's not insulated, not air sealed. And then while you're heating your home, that heat will rise and go out the top of your home, out of your attic or kind of the roof of your home. So when we think about air sealing and insulation, we often talk about basements and attics because you want to reduce how that stack effect will actually take the hot air out of your home. So those are my 2 beginning slides on weatherization, just a quick primer for you. And now I have the pleasure of introducing one of my colleagues, Robin King, and she's going to introduce our other 2 co-hosts. But hey, Robin, thanks so much for joining our Weatherization Wednesday.
Thanks for having me, and thank you all for joining. I see some familiar names in the participant list, and I just wanted to say we really are happy to have you and are happy to talk about this topic. I'm Robin King. I'm the Existing Homes Program Manager, as Becca mentioned. So I work on a lot of our weatherization focus programs here at Efficiency Vermont, and I feel very lucky to have such great partners that we work with to ensure that our customers are being well served. We have two of those amazing partners here with us today. The first is Mark Boudreau. He is a home performance contractor in our Efficiency Excellence Network. He's also one of our Healthy Homes contractors, and he is affiliated with two companies that you can see on the screen here. And our other co-host is Jim Bradley. He is has a lot of experience in the field, and you may recognize his voice from the radio if you're in a certain area of the state. And he is affiliated with the company that's below his name as well. So how we're going to kind of go forward with this presentation is we're going to have some information about kind of common healthy homes related topics on the screen, and we're going to ask our wonderful co-hosts to talk about their experiences. And at the end of the presentation, you'll have room to ask your burning questions, and we can hear from the experts. So with that, we're ready for the next slide to dig in.
Awesome. And I'll note to Robin's point around questions, if you're thinking of one throughout the presentation, go ahead and put it in the chat or put it in the Q&A section. If you're watching this on Facebook Live, go ahead, put it in the comments. We've got someone who's watching that, so you will ideally get that question answered as well. So feel free to put those in throughout. Okay, so Robin, hazardous materials and issues. Oh my goodness.
So we see some of this in our home performance projects, and I'm actually just going to turn it right over to Mark and Jim to talk about what they commonly see in homes, what you may want to be on the lookout for, and things that you can think about when you're taking on a project.
Sure, go ahead, Jim.
No, sure, certainly. So when you're looking at a house, a lot of times when a home performance contractor gets into the house, is invited in, your eyes are open for a myriad of things, but you definitely want to make sure that you're pointing out to the client, to the individual, of some of the hazards that you could be running into, or making a situation more challenging or dangerous if you start doing things to your home. Some of the things, like it shows some of the chemicals that we store in our home, whether that be some of the cleaning chemicals, some of the paints, fuel sources, that type of thing that we store inside of our thermal envelope or breathing space, that becomes more of a challenge, because if you start tightening up your home, you start changing what the parts per million are in the airstream, and so that can really start to affect the building occupants. And so any of the work that we do, we want to make sure that if we're changing the scales of the home on how things operate, that we're not creating an issue on the other side. And so as an individual, you need to know that. And it's not just as simple as a DIY person running down to the local hardware store, buying a bunch of stuff, trying to make some changes without giving proper respect towards how is the house performing right now. Are there allergens? Is there dust? Is there lead paint historically? Any homes prior to 1978, good chance that they're going to have some type of lead paint in there, which if you disturb that becomes an issue. You could have vermiculite insulation, which could have asbestos within that insulation. And if you have something like that and you go to disturb things, then you're jeopardizing the building occupants at that time. The one picture here with knob and tube wiring that we see a lot of in Vermont in our older housing stock could become a real issue with a fire hazard, especially if it's hidden in the walls or in the attic area, where you could end up adding insulation to a wall with that, because you're doing that blindly, basically, because you're doing it through penetrations and you can't see the knob and tube. And if you start affecting that or changing that, the coating on the outside is very brittle and it could cause a fire hazard. And so you got to be really aware of what's going on in the home first before you start a project, in my estimation.
Yeah, we often, folks contact us because they're interested in one particular thing. So it's most often a question of, can you come and insulate my attic for me?
Yeah.
And one of the things that we like to stress, and hazardous materials kind of falls under this umbrella, is the whole idea of the house as a whole system. So to Jim's point about the knob and tube electrical, it's a very old style wiring that's found in a lot of homes, and it may be fully integrated with a new system. And if you're not considering the whole big picture and looking at all the elements that are interrelated, back to the cable sweater analogy, what I like to tell people is, when we're doing weatherization work, we're if you think about it as a repair of a sweater, you don't necessarily just repair that hole. Sometimes you kind of have to unknit the sleeve if there's a hole in the elbow, and then re-knit the sleeve in order to do it properly. It's not a perfect metaphor, but it at least conveys the point that we often find ourselves removing hazardous materials or resolving these things. And the way we like to put it is like, well, it's like going to a baseball game. We go to the parking lot and we meet the clients and we talk about the game that's going to happen. And then we have to like get through the halls, and then we finally get to our seats, and the getting to our seats is the actual putting the insulation in the attic. But we've had this process that happens in advance. My current metaphor is taxiing a plane down a runway. So, the idea of, okay, we got to do a whole bunch of stuff, load baggage, get out the runway, get down to the inner runway, make sure everything's ready, and then we can take off. So it's just wanting to emphasize, I think, throughout this presentation, the idea that all these things are intricately connected, and all of the pieces were never, ever meant to go with any of the other pieces by design. The cellulose is not designed to go specifically with another house piece. So it's really important to have a comprehensive, first a professional who understands what they're doing and understands the interrelationships, and that understands how these materials interact with each other and how the different assemblies interact. So that's
wow. Well, Mark, you're adding to my analogy repertoire, which is always in need of addition. So I'm stealing that from you.
Steal away.
And what would you say is, how would people know that they may have knob and tube wiring or vermiculite in their homes? Like, what are some big indicators that you both have seen, or like how can people assess if that's something that they need to consider before taking on a weatherization project?
Simply popping your head up in the attic. And if you see, like the picture that you see here appears to be a floor joist with blocking, that appears to be a basement setting. So if you go down the basement and you look up and you see these white sleeves with the gray wires going through them, those are porcelain insulators. And then the gray lines are the actual conductors of electricity. And if you see that, it's not a reason to panic, but it's also something that you don't want to like change its state in any way and go, manipulating in any way. You would call an electrician and have them come. Many cases we see these systems are decommissioned in a house, which means all these lines are cut and they're not active. But in many cases we see that they're still alive. So we have to assume, I would say another tip is assume danger and verify that it's not, if you see these things. And I don't know if you want to talk vermiculite, Jim.
Well, yeah, certainly to that, because, and Mark, you hit on this in a great way, the fact that most people will call up this time of year because, one, we're seeing fuel costs start to rise. We're getting cooler temperatures. And so people will start calling Efficiency Vermont, then one of the EEN contractors, and they'll say, I just want more insulation. Well, it's a bigger question than that. And you can't just start with more insulation. And because of these measures that we're bringing out, usually what I try to tell people, you may have called about efficiency in the very beginning of this call, but we're going to first address health and safety. Then we're going to look at building durability. And if you get those two right, you're going to have energy efficiency in the back seat along for the ride with, it's going to be there. But you've got to get those first two priorities correct first, especially with vermiculite insulation. Vermiculite, they still use vermiculite in certain elements in our manufacturing industry, planting industry. They still use it because of its components. But back in the day, 80% of all vermiculite insulation, which is a granular type insulation, it looks somewhat crystalline. It's very light, tannish in color, sometimes gray, and a little bit shiny. And they used to use it in these big bags of material that you could just pour it into all these open cavities, especially with open balloon framing construction, which is more so of an older type of construction, because it can go down in these cavities and fill all in all. Well, the problem is it fills all in all. So getting rid of it was really, really challenging because it gets into the smallest of places. Why it's a hazard is because when 80% of it came from a mine in Libby, Montana back in the day, it was mined in where the veins of vermiculite ran parallel or intertwined with that of asbestos, but all of it was scooped out at the same time. So it's a highly likely probability that someone's going to have, if they have vermiculite, it's going to have some type of asbestos in that. You can't, by the Department of Vermont's health guidelines, you can't just rule out because you did 10, 20, 30 or more samples of an attic and say that, well, we didn't find vermiculite there, because somebody could have gotten one bag of vermiculite that had asbestos in it and used it in the back of the attic, and then it becomes a hazard. So it has to be treated appropriately. There is a fund called the Zonalite Fund, which is basically, they were one of the number one providers of the insulation. And there was back in the day, and there was a class action lawsuit where they provide money, a little over $4,000 possibly, for the remediation, depending on the project cost and everything else. So if they can verify that it was their product and they can verify that there's asbestos in it, they're going to help remediate that, some of that for you. So you're not biting off that whole thing all at once. But for a homeowner to get up in their attic and say, yeah, I've got vermiculite, I'm getting out the vacuum and the shop vac and just go ahead and get rid of it, not a good idea, because you're going to blow at 180 miles an hour, all these fibers around in your house, and that's going to contaminate the whole structure. So I would definitely advise getting a professional involved.
And if I could just jump in here, I know we had said we'd take questions at the end, but I think we've got one that really gets to your point, Jim. What does vermiculite look like? Like, if you saw it, what does it look like?
Yep. Once again, it's a little bit crystalline. It basically, if you remember the old, not the packing peanuts, but old styrofoam and the little round white balls that it would come in, it's similar in size to that and similar in weight, but it looks more like you have like these geometric structures that were cut off or broken up. And then you have like shiny spots. It looks very crystalline. And once again, it has anywhere from, I've seen it in a grayish to a tan to a golden color. And it's pretty easy to spot once you get it. It's very granular though. Instead of like a cellulose, which would be more fibrous and looks like chopped up newsprint, or like a rock wool that looks like fiberglass, very, very fiber rich. This is going to be something that's more granular, almost like like fish tank rocks, if you will. They're very small ones, but a certain color and definitely a lighter weight.
Thanks.
Yep, you can also Google it, vermiculite,
Sure.
vermiculite, yes.
I love it. Robin, should we move on to the next slide, you think?
Yeah, that would be great.
Cool. Oh, indoor air quality. Kind of touched
Definitely,
on
I was gonna say, definitely a hot topic. Something that I think is top of mind, especially as a lot of people have been spending more time at home over the past year and change, however long this has been going on. So again, I'll punt it over to our experts just to talk about their experiences, things that customers should keep in mind. We already touched upon, as Becca, I think, was pointing out some of this in terms of tightening up the home, but anything else that you all can think of that folks might like to know?
I'll start if that's all right. One of the things that is near and dear to my heart and what we try to bring into all the work that we do is the relationship between human health and the materials that are in a building, and how those materials are either creating a healthy environment or creating an unhealthy environment. And quite often, more often than not, we go into homes and we see at least some examples of how there are potentially negative effects going on in the house, either from moisture, excessive moisture, or poor ventilation in a house, or dust mites, pests, rodents, mice, rats, squirrels, bats. I mean, we've seen it all, and they get into your house and they set up their homes in your house, and which means they set up their plumbing in your house, and all that comes with that. So one of the things that we don't see happening is, often I go to a house and we're addressing a some functional issue like thermal or air sealing with the house. But I'll include the question of, well, how about indoor health? Does anybody here have any, unusual symptoms that are going on, or chronic allergies, or, any kind of respiratory issues in the household? And if I see something like a house like that, that's poorly ventilated, has shag carpeting that's 30 years old on every floor, including the wet basement floor. And I'm not making this up. I mean, this is stuff that I'm sure Jim and I see every day. And so I think if I could convey something, it's that there is a relationship. We can't necessarily draw a correlation between human health directly and shag carpeting in a basement, but we know that shag carpeting is going to hold water and is going to create mold conditions, which is going to create mold spore, which is going to, damage the house and has a known potential negative impact on human health. So we don't see people making the connection between health of people and inhabitants and the health of their homes. And that's kind of, I guess, what hits me most significantly off the cuff. And I'm sure you have some great things to add, Jim.
Well, what's so important, Mark, as you mentioned, is the fact of, from a personal story, when I first got into this side of the business, when I say this side, the weatherization and the, energy efficiency side of the business, I got into it kind of out of a personal need, already having a lot of experience in the building trades. But then I started finding out, living in a Cape, in 1989 Cape, and younger boys, this is about 20 years ago, every year during this time of year, they would start to have respiratory issues. They start to cough a lot. And I said, okay, we got some condensation on our windows. We'll get a little bit of mold, but we clean that up, everything else. But it kept coming back. And then finally one day I stuck my head up in the attic. Oh my, it was black. It had mold everywhere. And it wasn't black because the lights were off. It was black because there was mold everywhere. And I then did more of the educational process of this and found out that it was because there was an interchange between indoor air and attic air. And it was one that indoor air was leaking out with warm, moist air. It would condense upon the colder building surfaces, providing an opportunity for mold to grow. And then there would also be that exchange of those mold spores back into the living space as well. And it was causing my sons to really suffer through the winter. Once I fixed the issue, got rid of it, they never had another issue. In fact, our youngest boy now, our later child in life, he lives in the same room, never has an issue respiratorily speaking, because if the problem was fixed. And so that air quality component is really, really important. So you may have a latent problem that will really be fixed by these measures, but you could have a problem that you're not aware of that could be exacerbated by performing some of these measures if you don't address the underlying concern. And so if let's say you're sleeping in a bedroom that's already drafty and leaky, you may not have a problem sleeping at night. But let's say you go ahead and tighten up the house and you're not addressing balanced ventilation in the house. And so you have a higher CO2, carbon dioxide level inside the house that's well over 1,000 parts per million, which is really the recommended baseline. You could have it at 2,000, 4,000 parts per million. And then you find out you're not sleeping well, you have cognitive issues, you have irritability issues. And, that's why it's really important to make sure if you're tightening up the home, do you have adequate fresh air ventilation? And is it a balanced ventilation? So as Mark alluded to, you don't want to just be ventilating by turning bath fans on and depressurizing the house, because that air comes back in through the structure through areas usually we don't want it to, like across as he put it, I love that term, the plumbing of the rodents that they left behind, and then that's getting into your airstream and it's affecting that indoor air quality. And once you do these projects, what's really important is I always recommend to our clients to get a radon test done if you haven't had one done, because once again, you're decreasing the amount of warm conditioned air usually that could leak out of the house. And that means it can concentrate at a higher level any particulates or issues that were in the airstream. And so you want to make sure you address that. One thing that's very easy to use, just as an example, this is an indoor air quality monitor. So it's a nice little interface. It gives you the parts per million for CO, and it's made by IQ Air. It's about $276, but it is a great way to continuously monitor the levels of CO2, particulates, air quality for your area, and it helps you track things. But once you do these items, usually during a home performance assessment, we ask somebody to have this running so we can collect the data, or after you do the work yourself, make sure you're checking that indoor air quality. It's a really vital, important item that we should look at as home owners and occupants.
Yeah, the other thing that, to just piggyback on that very briefly, that we often get the question after describing, I use the same metaphor, a sweater and windbreaker. So happy to see that it's out there. Often clients will respond by saying, well, why should I bother then tightening up everything? I have to go and deal with indoor air quality and ventilation issues and that sort of thing. And there are really two answers to that. One is what Jim already talked about, drawing, fresh air through the building by turning a bath fan on. And then the other is, what we're trying to do is get the house as tight as we can possibly get it. And then whatever money our clients have spent to heat the house and heat the air in the house, that it stays in the house. So we employ a lot of different ventilation systems that basically what are called recovery ventilators, heat or energy recovery. And all that it is the super fancy way of saying we exhaust the stale air out, but we take the heat out of that stale air and we put it in the incoming fresh air stream, so that fresh air that might be on a 20-degree day, that air might be 20 degrees, it's getting warm to about 66 degrees. So we're saving the money that you just put into your house, and we're putting fresh air back in that's tempered with a little bit of heat that we recovered from exhaust. And really, over and over and over, it's been shown that this is the very best way to improve efficiency, to save money, to make a comfortable home and a healthy home. So ventilation is a big, I still think it's an underexposed question in this whole world. And we're doing better at helping educate people around this, but that's how we do it. And that's the answer to that question.
Yeah, I agree completely.
We'll just go on to the next slide because we still have a couple of things to get to before we open up to Q&A. And I think this one is definitely something that you two have both talked a little bit about so far, especially with the last comment from you, Mark, about ventilation. And, Jim, with your personal story, which I really appreciated and loved. I think we all have stories of how we can think about our homes have impacted our health. But would either of you like to kind of talk about moisture and vapors, and again, maybe thinking about what people could look for to know about signals or when they can reach out to someone, or when it's really time to reach out to someone?
Yeah, moisture simply happens if you think about having a cold glass of iced tea on a hot summer day, and you're going to have a wet glass in your hand. What it is it's moisture in the air that's condensing on a cold surface. Right. There's Becca's. In the case of the window, you have a cold exterior making the surface of that window cold. You have a wet window, which means there's probably 70-degree air, which holds a lot. Warm air holds water. So that water, when that water vapor reaches the surface of that cold window, it's going to condense, just like a cold glass of iced tea in the summer. Well, it's not only going to condense on glass, but it's going to condense on other surfaces. So if you see the black specking in that photograph, or the black staining in the top right photo, those are all evidences of either one of two things. It's either ambient moisture that's condensing on that surface, or it's what we call bulk water or atmospheric water that's somehow getting into the house and leaking into those areas, creating moisture. And in the basement, what you see is a vapor barrier laid down over what is likely soil. And because soil is going to be a source of water, water is the most ironic substance from the building science point of view. We need it to survive. Absolutely. We can't survive more than a few days without it. But if we live in a home in the Northeast we have water, and it's in many ways, for a building science person, it's the enemy. And we're constantly trying to manage it and keep it from doing these condensation things or getting into building assemblies, because the net result is a building that's going to rot because of the wetting and drying cycles. It's going to mold, which is not going to be good for human health. And it's not very pretty. And in the long run, that window will rot in the period of 20 years, and it will require replacement. So that's my piece on that.
You know, the thing is so important about moisture and moisture vapor. It's going to happen, and it's how you handle it. You know, so there's others in this industry that says, you know, it's not a question of if moisture will get into your building, how will you deal with it once it does? And so you can make a really robust, resilient structure from the outside, and you keep rain out because you've checked all the boxes and everything works well. But on the inside, you haven't done anything about indoor air quality, and so you still have these moisture issues. With that, one of the big things, a big concern is if you're going to start tightening up your house and you have a basement crawl space or a basement overall that has a dirt floor or a stone foundation or just really any foundation that has not been properly addressed, then what you're going to do is you could really set up a mold factory, because you're going to increase the humidity level inside the entire house, but mainly in the basement. So with wood, if wood stays consecutively wet for about 12 months in a row, it's going to start to rot. Now that's regular dimensional lumber, you know, your 2x4s, your 6x6s, whatever. When you get some of the engineered lumber or engineered sheathing, that's vertical mulch in a lot of cases. And so what's going to happen is it's more susceptible to moisture problems. And mold needs three things to set up and grow. It needs a proper temperature, it needs a proper food source, and it needs the proper moisture itself to get in there. So if it has all those items, and moisture being key here, it's going to start to set up and it's going to grow, and it starts to degrade the building materials and affect the quality of the airstream. So when you're looking at the house as a system, you have to take all these variables into consideration. And a simple thing too that we recommend to people is if they have what's called a hygrometer or a humidity sensor, check your humidity levels inside your house. If you're somewhere between 30 and 55%, that's a nice sweet spot to be. If you get lower than 30% humidity, it's going to be so dry inside there. You might be able to keep the condensation off your windows, but it's going to be so dry in there, you're going to start to get skin splitting and, you know, possible eczema and things like that. Once you start approaching up over 55% and 70% sustained, then it becomes that perfect environment for the mold to grow. So looking at the house as a system, once again, is really important. And as Mark said, there could be bulk water moisture coming from another area in the house, a pipe leak, a toilet leak, some siding, you know, it's getting past the siding, it's getting past the roofing materials and getting into the wall, and it starts to develop the same situation. So getting the house looked at, that's why it's not just an energy audit, it's a home performance assessment, to see how the house is performing as a system. And if you're going to be making changes, make sure those are intelligent changes for the best results is the way I would approach it.
Wow. Well, this is, you both are really just, there's so much knowledge here. And I know we're coming up at the half-hour mark, and we've got some questions there. So if we don't mind, next slide, and then maybe we'll, I'll do a little bit on where folks can go, because if you are watching this and you're going, oh my goodness, this is some expert information, and you're taking notes, you might have filled up a few pages. So we want to make sure that you've got a next step if that wasn't all sponged during the last half an hour. So yeah, Robin.
Yeah, final kind of point here, and I think we've talked about a lot of this in different ways, but the benefits of weatherization. So as Jim touched upon, you know, both Jim and Mark are home performance efficiency excellence network contractors. And so, you know, we talk a lot about our customer journey and different ways that people can interact and weatherize their homes. So I'd just like both Jim and Mark to touch upon specifically benefits of weatherization with that health focus or that health lens, maybe things that you've seen or ways that customers have been impacted, or I know that we've had some personal stories so far, but I think that a lot of times, and we've talked a lot about this throughout the presentation, but people see it as something that they can save energy with, or other ways that, you know, they may pursue weatherization, or for the reasons that they want to pursue weatherization. But I think sometimes the nexus between health and energy isn't as clearly defined or explained. So with that, I pass it along.
Well, certainly, I think the big thing that I look at all the time is, and I alluded to for my own personal experience with my own sons, is the fact that because there were issues inside the house, correcting these issues help the health and safety of the house and the durability, stop the mold process. But at the same time, it allowed us to start saving more energy. So getting somebody who understands this effectively to look at your house, I think is vitally important. We're not just selling a measure. When I say a measure, putting more insulation in your attic or caulking some windows or putting some weather stripping on your door. We're looking at the house as a system to make sure any investment that you're going to make is a proper investment, yielding the best results. A lot of people ask, well, what's the return on investment? Well, the return on investment isn't just the initial energy savings. It's some of the things that are even really tough to track. Is how much better is my health and my quality of life inside the home? Because if we're closing up our homes for 6 to 9 months a year in this area, and we're not getting fresh air from outside, we may be more efficient, but the whole indoor air issue becomes more paramount. And so as Mark said, it's becoming more and more important because people are starting to connect the dots of saying, hey, there's something that correlates here that we need to be more attentive about. But once you do address those changes, I can tell you, when I have the 2 ERVs in my house that were retrofit type ERVs from Zender, which is a great company for this. There's others out there. And when we shut the windows, and if we forgot to turn them on, because you don't need them running when the windows are open. When we shut the windows, I immediately can tell when I walk into the house, there's a difference because the air quality has changed. But having that air quality be where it is and getting the toxins out of your house, getting that air exchange, stopping from the basement, from that wet basement getting into the house, be able to stop those things and deal with them appropriately. But yeah, definitely some huge benefits. And by the way, you're going to end up having energy savings, which is going to become more and more important, it looks like, in this coming heating season.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, and 100%. I don't have, analytical data, scientific, stacks of reams of evidence, but I have a number of anecdotes, and we see in the field every day situations. Just last week, we had a client who we installed a heat recovery ventilator for about 10 years ago, and the core died. And we have to replace that core. So we had to order a new core, and long story short, there was a piece that broke and it now doesn't work. So we had to order the new piece. But I was talking with a client a few days ago, and she said, oh my God, you would not believe the difference in air quality. We had no idea the heavy lifting that the heat recovery ventilation system was doing in our house, like throughout the entire house. It was a fully ducted ventilation system. And so I guess I would leave on that anecdote of like people saying, yeah, this really does matter. I didn't know it mattered, but now that it's gone, it does matter. And by the way, when are you coming over to put my heat recovery core in? And I said, as soon as it arrives.
I love that.
and Becca, if I may, there was, speaking of stories, there was a house I did an energy assessment or home performance assessment for many years ago. And it was a hot summer day, found a lot of leaky areas into the attic, a lot of recessed lights that needed to be sealed, and a lot of issues with the basement. And so we developed a scope of work. And later in the fall, we started doing the work. And just because of sequencing and everything else, it got finished on Christmas Eve. The thing, the takeaway was the daughter, on the day of the audit, when it was 100, it felt like 100 degrees outside. That attic temperatures were 100, and I think it was about 119 degrees. And that air was getting into the house. She was saying, I asked, well, where do you keep your thermostat at during the winter? And she says, 55 degrees. We have blankets on. And the dad looked at me and says, yeah, we do. So they were always uncomfortable in the house. The day we finished the job was on Christmas Eve. And I went in just to, tell them goodbye and everything else. And it was 8 degrees outside. They didn't have their heating system on. They had their fireplace on for ambiance, just for, I say a fireplace, a wood stove. And they were walking around in shorts and stocking feet. So that whole comfort level dynamically changed. And, so they're more comfortable in the house. They feel more free. They're not like huddled in blankets in a corner. And so that alone was a nice takeaway that this weatherization, work does work. And it's definitely worth getting into.
Yeah, it sure beats, working at home with cold feet and having to do 20 push-ups every half hour because you're too cold.
Yeah.
Well, I love that. And, you know, as you can see from my background, you know, we all do love a good blanket or a sweater, but it's so much better to be comfortable in your home. So Robin, I know that we talked about what we would want folks to take away, and some of those are resources for next steps. So if you've heard everything, you pointed out to me this how-to that we actually have on the Efficiency Vermont page.
Yeah, we have a great blog, and as you can see, only a 3-minute read that has some more information on how energy efficiency, kind of that nexus that I was talking about, that connection between energy efficiency and indoor health. As I mentioned, Jim and Mark are both Efficiency Excellence Network contractors, and we have a whole listing of weatherization contractors on our website. So if you're feeling really inspired and motivated, you can take a look at that tool that we have and make sure that you connect with a home performance contractor to start your journey. So, you know, we're really excited again to have all of you here. And so these are some next steps you can start to dig into. And so with that, I think we're all set for Q&A. I know we have some additional slides here with some information, but I think we could.
Yeah, I'm gonna skip through this one, but as you can see, we've got some fun animations. This is all we covered. I think the only thing we might not have touched on was just avoiding the synthetic cleaners and products, but there's lots of different ways that you can make your home more healthy and efficient. And I want to end before we get to Q&A with, there are a lot of options for weatherization. If today you were thinking, hey, I have heard about free weatherization, or I might be income eligible, certainly health and safety is a component to that. There are free weatherization services throughout the state. If you're not income qualified, we also talked about Home Performance with Energy Star, which is our comprehensive weatherization program. And then last, there are DIY rebates, but I think we had some expert testimony here today about when you might choose to not do it yourself, but instead get that contractor. But maybe for some of the smaller things, we do have that $100 rebate. So this is the income eligible information. As you can see throughout the state, there's an option for you. And then wanted to end with a little bit on what you can do next with our customer support number for Efficiency Vermont. And we do have free virtual home energy visits, which if you're thinking, ooh, what's my next step? That might be it. And lots of other resources. So with that, I would say thank you, and let's open it up to Q&A. I'll stop sharing.
I think we had some questions come through, so I'm not sure how. First time, my co-host. So I'm okay. I can.
You got it, Robin.
Come from the top. So Paul Grenier asked, do we breathe air from our basement? I think this was while you were presenting on the stack effect.
Yeah, I would let this group take it away, but it's been interesting to see just the types of questions we've been getting on Facebook, because it's scary. So yeah, do we breathe the air from our basements?
Yes, you do. The amount and the volume and rate of flow that you breathe is dependent on how your house is configured. So for example, a house that is built on a crawl space, let's say, which is fully insulated, if you call the space below the basement or below that thermal boundary, if you will, then no, you're probably not breathing much air from the crawl space. But if you have a door, you know, in a stairway down to your basement, yes, you are in fact breathing, you know, in some concentration, the air from your basement. And it's mixing, particularly if you have a hot air furnace, which it's a heat system that uses, it's basically a big firebox with a fan in it. And the fan pushes hot air that the firebox creates around the ducts in your house. And so often there are leaks in that ductwork, and there are leaks in the ductwork that's in the walls, and there are leaks in the ductwork that's in the basement. So that basement air is mixing throughout the house. So yes, in fact, and you're probably also breathing air from your attic as well. in some measure, and from your wall cavities. Everywhere that windbreaker is unzipped, everywhere that a windbreaker is unzipped is a potential pathway to bring that particular that pre-filtered air into your living space.
Yeah, that's Jim. Did you want to comment on that one, or we have another question coming up too?
No, it's fine. I think Mark covered it perfectly.
Ooh, so this is one I'm sure you've seen before too, Robin. We have someone who asked, I've had an energy audit and was told that my home is tight, so not much leakage. Their windows are original from around the late 1980s. And next to their windows, it feels colder in the winter. And this person wants to know, would they benefit from newer, more energy efficient windows?
I could comment on that one. See, the windows are an interesting conversational piece, because if you're selling windows all the time, it becomes more attractive to say an upgrade would definitely be more beneficial. A lot of windows out there, by upgrading, if you already have serviceable windows that lock well, that are weather stripped well, that if they're double pane glass that has, and it's still sealed in between the two panes of glass, and they haven't started to fog over, it's hard for me to ever justify to a customer to go out and buy the same double pane window again, because the payback period and the time that they'd have to be replaced again doesn't warrant that. Now, here's the consideration. If you have really old leaky farmhouse windows, or you have other windows that, there was one that I used to have called Rivco that were falling apart in this house. Yeah, it necessitated me changing out the windows. But when you do that, I've heard people lament the fact that we changed out our windows and now we're having fogging or we're having condensation, and it didn't solve the issue if it was there before, or it created the issue. Yeah. The understanding the whole analogy with the cold glass of water or iced tea during the summer, I mean, you have the dew point that happens at that glass. So when you have just a simple double pane glass, and you have the warm air that has moisture in it inside the building, hits that glass, it can't carry as much moisture, so it dumps it on the glass. That's why triple pane windows have become much more prevalent, and we're starting to get a lot more domestic manufacturers out there that can provide these at a similar price point to some of the higher end Marvin or Anderson windows. And that's great. And I saw that Pella has a very nice option out there as well. And what that does with that triple pane of glass, it allows there to be a better delta of temperature differential between inside and outside, but yet it keeps that inside pane of glass more in line with the inside temperature of the room. And so you're less likely to see that condensation issue. But let's get down to the reality of it. Let's say you have a wall assembly that's an R21, so R resistance to heat loss, and say it's a code compliant wall, so it's an R21 to an R25. Your glass, a double pane glass, is going to be about a 3.4 to maybe a 3 for as far as the R value. So when you stand in front of it, you're always going to feel colder there. You're going to have a radiant heat loss as well, and yet you've got the nice view. We don't want to get rid of our windows. So there's always going to be some type of a comfort differential when you stand in front of a window, even though it's closed. And so even getting a triple pane, it'll be better from a comfort standpoint, but you'll still feel a difference. I would give more consideration to the fact of, were those windows installed appropriately to begin with? Are there leaks, for building durability? Because we'll see that a lot, that it's rotting the framing out behind the scenes that you can't necessarily tell. I would look at it that way. But if it's a functional window, if it seals right and everything else, I mean, even brand new double hung windows, we'll see air leakage come by the frames because that's the nature of a double hung window. So going with a casement window or an awning style or one of the European tilt and turn that seal better and they don't have that bypass sash type of operation, it's going to be a tighter window. But before you go out and just wholesale replace it, I would look at, if your house is really tight, hey, maybe give deference towards indoor air quality and maybe a balanced ventilation system, which could help out tremendously.
Thank you, Jim.
So the next question, unless Mark has anything to add. Nope, all good. Okay. Comes from Carla. And so I think this was in relation to the conversation on vermiculite. And the question is, what if you're in a 1986 mobile home?
Mobile homes are tough ones, to be quite candid, just because when the majority of them were built, even if it was 2x6 construction, there's a lot of these I've been into where proper deference was not given towards the assembly And so, getting that checked out by a professional, I think, is really important. A lot of times in mobile homes, you'll have an attic space that doesn't exist because it's just like a cathedral ceiling. There's no real opportunity for improvement there. Or underneath the mobile home, you may have insulation on the floor, but the rodents have found that a great space as well. And so you want to make sure you're preventing vermin from getting in, and that you have a really good air seal there at the same time. I know some people like to put skirting around the mobile home that's insulated. That can work well until it doesn't. What I mean by that is until during the summer, someone got in there, they breached in one of the areas and they never put it back. And so that could happen again as well. But depending on a 1986 mobile home, I trust is probably going to be, if it was sold for this region, should have been a 2x6 construction. So your wall assembly could have been an R19 as far as the rating of it. But if it's performing there, I'm not really sure. But still, getting someone to take a look at it can make sure that those insulation areas, whether they can be improved or not, and if they're in good performing working order, especially underneath on the underbelly of the mobile home.
And that, I mean, we talk to folks who are in mobile home or manufactured homes all the time, and it always surprises me just how there are things you can do, but for the most part, the initial construction really does have an impact on the quality of the home. Huge. So yeah, Mark, did you want to weigh in on that one, or we've got a question about a attached garage, which is up next? If you want to,
you're muted, Mark.
Oh, Mark, you're muted. Oh.
Sorry about that. We have actually, we're at a job site and we have HEPA vacuum cleaners going, which is
right now. Oh,
yes. So we have active air HEPA filtration for our workers. That is actual air filtration that's industrial level, and we have HEPA vacuum cleaners that we use for all the cleaning that we do. So that's why I was muted. Sorry. So, sorry, what's the next question?
That was the best reason to stay muted I've heard in this whole Zoom experience. Thank you. So our next question is, any recommendations or advice for indoor air, from an indoor air quality standpoint, for homes with an attached garage?
Yeah, this is a really big topic. Hazardous materials in a garage. Even, lawnmower gasoline and paints and thinners. And I've seen an astounding array of hazardous materials in attached garages. So there's generally at least one. An attached garage means it's attached to the house. So there's at least one zone where, and it might be a wall where the house is attached to the garage, and that wall is going to represent a particularly critical barrier between what's going on in the garage and what's going on inside the home. Often what we see are a lot of holes. Sometimes we see drywall that's partly taped. Sometimes we just see wood frame walls with fiberglass insulation bats in them. That's what we talk about is how connected is the garage to the living space? To what degree is it connected? Is it really connected, or is it really uncoupled from the space? So with attached garages, you'd be consulting with someone like myself or Jim. We would come in, and the question that we would be asking is, okay, how connected is the garage with the house? And if it's very connected, what can we do to disconnect what's going on in the garage with the house? The most obvious thing that you'd never want to do is if you have if you have a tuck under garage where you drive your car in and there's a living space or a bedroom above, you of course wouldn't want to run your car in there because carbon monoxide is in that space, and it could definitely, if it's a good connection between the inside and the outside, then, or the garage and the living space, then you could potentially have these hazardous materials. Hold on, I'm going to shout up to the crew and just let them know that to hold on the vacuum. Hey guys.
Mark has got the best reason. See, you get the real deal on Button Up Vermont. You get folks at a job site.
It's really happening.
Well, that was a great answer. I mean, I hadn't understood that with attached garages, but is there anything folks could do if they're on the upper floors?
There are many things that we can do, and I don't know how we're doing on time. I just want to be sensitive to that. But the thing to do would be to talk with either Jim or myself or any other EEN contractor who could then outline the particular ways in which your particular situation could be resolved. There's often 2 or 3 ways to make these resolutions, and they are very dependent on what your specific case is. So I saw a pop up, like there was a question about how to deal with, moisture in a basement. It's a very, it's not just one thing that we can say, do this, because it's a whole system. And because it's interrelated and you might not see the connections, it requires somebody who has seen all the connections and can put everything together into a package that basically resolves the problem, doesn't create a new problem, yes, and is a long-term solution that's good for your building and good for your health. That's why we come and do what we do. And so I would say if we are not getting to some of those questions, reach out to us or an EEN contractor, and we can definitely help to answer that. But the questions, like to just specifically, I hope that makes sense. It's every situation is different.
Well, thanks, Mark. Jim, I know we've got one more question we haven't answered, but I'd love if you want to weigh in on this one, and then we'll take that and we'll wrap up.
Sure. The thing that we like to do with some, in fact, I got chided a lot for buying it, was a theatrical smoke machine or theatrical fog machine. And we will use that to demonstrate. Now that I learned the first day, make sure you place the machine where you can reach the on-off switch. Because when the fog happens, it fills all in all, and you literally can't see your hand in front of your face. But when you do a proper pressure diagnostics and you can show that migration of the fog from the garage into the house, the aha moment is great. Some of the tools that we use is diagnostics individuals will use an infrared camera, which helps us, but it really helps the client understand, oh, that's where the cold is coming from, or the heat is coming from, or whatever is going on, or the water leak may be. But then using the fog machine in certain cases, we don't do it on every home performance assessment, but it's so helpful to visualize where this air is moving through. And when you look at a garage, Mark is so correct on this. We did one house, it was a relatively new construction. It had a basement with a tuck under garage that was completely connected. So when you're in the basement, you're looking at the car, and she would often run her car to get it warmed up, and then her CO detector was going off. And the thing is, most people don't know this. When your carbon monoxide detector is going off, most that you pull off the shelf only trigger at 32 parts per million sustained. That's just the concentration level. You start getting affected as a human being anything above 9 parts per million. And so if it's at 32 sustained before it starts going off, is it really doing the job you need it to? So that's why getting one that actually has a visual readout as well, or getting one that's more sensitive, they're more expensive, will be able to tell you really what the concentration levels are. But she had that, and definitely her carbon monoxide was reading levels at 13 parts per million the day we were there, and she'd been gone for 2 hours and out of the house. And so that just tells us that becomes really dangerous. So making sure that you're not idling your car in an attached garage is really important, but also all the VOCs that can come off the things that Mark mentioned into the house, you want to make sure that barrier is sealed. A lot of people don't know this, but that junction there by International Building Code is supposed to be a fire rated assembly. And most people just put standard plywood up there, not sheetrock, not anything else. And they think that's good enough when it really isn't. It's not from a health and safety standpoint. So we'll recommend that to individuals to make sure that barrier, whether it's a tuck under garage or an attached garage, you've got to make sure that junction to the house is sound.
Wow. Well, since that was really informative, and as we're gonna wrap up now just so we can get folks out for lunch, but I want to just truly thank you, Jim, Mark. This was so informative for me, and I've done a few of these. And Robin, thank you for bringing us Mark and Jim, and for being our program manager for all these important programs that we run here at Efficiency Vermont. So with that, I would just say you've got some information in the chat. We've heard time and time again from our guests that if you're thinking about a project, that EEN network, consider health and safety, and there's lots of opportunities to support your weatherization goals. So I would say with that, anything else? Or are we ready to let Mark get back to work?
I would just like to give another thank you to our guests. I feel really honored to have both of them as part of our Efficiency Excellence Network. You know, they're experts in the field. They do so much for our customers. It's really exciting that they've donated their time today to speak with all of you. So I just wanted to say a very heartfelt thank you to Jim and Mark, and leave anything that they want to say, any kind of final wrap up or anything that they've got going on that they want to plug people into.
I can leave with this is the fact of, you know, I know Mark is in the same neighborhood in this whole thing as far as the passion for this business. It's not just about selling units. It's about making sure things are done appropriately and that, you know, your money's invested appropriately and your health and safety are definitely at the forefront of that. With that, you know, I do a radio show, don't get paid. It's not a shameless plug. It's a plug for more educational opportunities that we do on WDEV AM 550 with my colleague Chris West on Saturdays from 12:30 to 1:30. We just started up. We've had our second show for the fall, and then we'll go into the spring. You know, so we do it 6 months out of the year. But it just is an opportunity for us to give more information like this out there to consumers and to contractors, and have people call in with their questions specific to their situation. And with that, it's called House Calls Vermont. Once again, we do have a website with that, and it gives you like an audit eavesdropping. So you can actually go through an energy audit or a home performance assessment and watch what we're looking for and what we find. And that may trigger something for you to say, oh, I've got that in my house. I need to have that looked at. So I would just say that these opportunities are out there, and this is why we're involved, because we want to make sure if you're doing work on your house, it's going to be done appropriately and you're going to be happy about it and you'll spread the word to others.
Yeah, well said. Really well said, Jim. And I think one of the things that's near and dear to my heart these days is in our society, we are looking increasingly for simple answers. We want a less complicated life. We want less complicated stuff, less complicated problems. We're constantly kind of seeking for simple. And what I would say is, it's not the building science thing and living in a home and taking care of a home. It's not simple. Having an organization like Efficiency Vermont and having professionals who are committed to this, to making it simple, to helping you navigate and facilitate a process through to a resolution. Houses, in my opinion, are as complex as the human body. And we've devoted our lives to sorting those things out and identifying all the ways in which we can resolve issues. And basically what I want to just say is a plug for Efficiency Vermont and the people who are dedicated to this and really trying to push this information out there that yes, these issues are complicated. You can't stick your head in the sand and just add insulation in the attic and expect that your house is going to be great. You absolutely cannot do that because you're actually going to make a worse situation in your house. Yes. So, but the simple path is to connect with one of us.
Yes.
And let us help you make it simple, because we really can do that. Certainly.
Well said. Okay, both that was the perfect ending. And with that, I just sign us off. Thank you for joining the Weatherization Wednesday this week, and we'll be back for our final Weatherization Wednesday next week. It's going to be a game show style, so come ready to play. And thank you, Jim. Thank you, Mark. Robin, as always. Bye, everybody.
Bye.